Welcome to today's webinar on effective auditing and logging in Oracle E-Business Suite. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development and Integrity, and I will be the moderator for this e-learning session. The speaker today is Stephen Coast. Steve is a Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrity Corporation, and he's been working with Oracle products since 1994, and for the last 17 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle Business Suite and Oracle database, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OAUG and the National Collaborative Conferences. Steve is recognized internationally for his vast security knowledge and expertise. I'll now turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Today's topic is effective auditing and logging in the Oracle Business Suite. And this presentation is going to walk through how do you actually do auditing and logging in the Oracle Business Suite that you can get meaningful data out of. We work with a lot of clients that have Oracle Business Suite and really face this challenge. They have compliance requirements, audit requirements. They need to get what's happening in the Oracle Business Suite environment. Who's logging in? Who's doing what? When, where, why? And unfortunately, in the Oracle Business Suite, there's lots of different logging in the application. There's both database logging, there's application logging, there's audits that you can turn on at different places. And so there's not just one switch you turn on and get perfect auditing. You really have to look at what's available and how you should be doing it. And so this presentation will really be based off of a lot of our client experience on trying to set this up effectively for a large number of clients and how they did it, how we were successful in helping them, and what lessons were learned, and what are the kind of some of the best practices. Before we get started, a quick introduction into Integrity. Integrity is founded in 2001. Integrity was founded in 2001 by former Big Six consultants working on large e-business suite environments. From there, we realized that security wasn't being handled. People weren't changing the app's password from the default of apps and things like that back almost 20 years ago. We've come a long way since then, and Integrity has also kind of been the leader in trying to make sure Oracle Business Suite is secure. So we really have two sides to our business. We have a set of products that we actually develop specifically for Oracle Business Suite to help our clients protect themselves. The first one is AppSentry. AppSentry is a scanning and auditing tool for Oracle Business Suite. So this is what's validating your security. It's going through the technology stack, the application, looking at system profile options, patches, default passwords. It's doing about 1,000 different checks against the apps, against the Oracle Business Suite to make sure it's secure. Our other product is called AppDefend, and this is an application firewall. So if you're running Oracle Business Suite on the internet, AppDefend is a critical piece of security to help you defend against all those security vulnerabilities that you are hopefully applying and fixing as part of the critical patch updates. But if you aren't applying those immediately, AppDefend is providing that virtual patching solution. We won't talk about AppDefend today, but AppDefend also provides a very robust logging capability. So a lot of the places where logging is difficult in Oracle Business Suite, AppDefend actually automates that very easily and very well and helps you along. This presentation is mostly based off of our services, so we're working every day with clients trying to help them solve their security challenge, compliance requirements, etc. in the Oracle Business Suite. And so we do security assessments, we do compliance work, we do security design, so we're helping clients implement products like Oracle Database Vault, Oracle Audit Vault, and Imperva Guardian. How do you make all these tools work with the Oracle Business Suite? And finally, Integrity is backed up by a world-class internal research team that we're finding a lot of those security vulnerabilities. We're constantly publishing out white papers, blog posts on how you actually secure Oracle Business Suite well. So we're actually doing a lot of research internally. So this presentation today is actually based off of our white paper, the guide to auditing and logging in the Oracle Business Suite. That's actually publicly available on our website. So we publish out most of our research on how to do these things effectively in Oracle Business Suite. So enough about Integrity, let's kind of get into the meat of the topic. So we're going to start talking about a framework. Really, when you're thinking about auditing and logging, most organizations don't do a very good job about starting from the requirements definition. They're like, oh, we have a compliance requirement, we have to turn on some auditing. They don't think through the process on how do you capture it, how do you retain the data, how do you actually alert and report on it. And so we're going to start off by talking about a framework. How do you base this off of something, and how do you actually have something that you can talk about? So when you actually go to your external auditor, they say, oh, you're not doing logging very well or auditing in the environment, show us this information. You can say, yes, we're capturing this information. We've thought through the process, and that's usually a very effective way to actually work with external auditors, internal auditors, IT security to say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're capturing this information, this is what we're doing with it. That goes a long ways. And then we'll walk through the technology stack. We'll talk about how you actually do auditing and logging in the Oracle Business Suite. How do you do it at the database layer? And then finally, we'll wrap everything up and say, how do you centralize this information? How do you protect it? How do you actually alert on it and report on it? And then we'll open up to some questions at the end. So let's kind of delve into the auditing and logging framework to start with. The key point about Oracle Business Suite is it's a very large application, and it's very difficult to do some of these things in terms of audit, especially around auditing and logging. How do you secure a massive application, and how do you know what's happening? And one of the things that we see most of our clients kind of struggle with is, oh, the DBAs are working on the auditing and logging. They're defining the audits. Unfortunately, that doesn't work because this is not just a one-person kind of project. The requirements definitions have to come from compliance, internal audit, IT security. You have to very clearly communicate this because the DBAs are not compliance people. They are not IT security people. Once you tell them what to set up, they can do it. But most often when we talk to DBAs, like, we have no idea what they want. They just said, track all changes, do these types of things. And that becomes very problematic. So there's often a lack of communication, a lack of clear definition around requirements, and this requires multiple disciplines to actually sit down at a table and say, okay, this is the information we're looking at. The Oracle Business Suite and Oracle Database does provide very robust audit functionality. It is very siloed. It is multiple different features that have to be turned on. But unfortunately, we don't see a lot of our organizations taking advantage of the deep, rich audit capabilities within the Oracle Business Suite and the Oracle Database to actually capture meaningful information. What's going on in the environment? Who's making changes? Who's signing on? Who's accessing what data? Who's creating what data? Who's changing objects? So there's lots of things that are going on in the Oracle Business Suite. So you really have to think through is how do we best do this? What are we going after? What are we trying to protect against? Where are our risks in the environment? And once you can define those requirements and then start taking it down to the next layers and say, okay, yeah, we want to see major changes. We want to see security events. We want to see who's connecting to understand if accounts like apps are being shared, etc. So as we walk through this process, we're going to talk about 4 different steps that we actually have to think about around the auditing and logging requirements. First is how do we capture the information? What information are we capturing? Second is how are we actually going to retain it and protect it? Where is it going to be stored? Is it stored in the database? Is it stored in files? How do I can potentially centralize that? How do I protect it? Who am I protecting it from? Can the DBAs actually access that audit trail information and delete things? If I'm capturing audit trail to understand what the DBAs are doing, it becomes very important and part of the control that the DBAs can't actually manipulate that audit trail data. How am I actually alerting on it? What do I care about in real time? So when we talk about alerts and reports, think of alerts as more the real time. Something happened in my environment. I really probably should know about that right away in order that I can take an action. Reporting is much more of a detective control. It's happening after the fact that I'm getting a report maybe a week later, a month later, even a quarter later to say, okay, this is what changed. These are the people who did it. When we talk about reporting, we also need to talk about who's actually getting those reports. Are they qualified to review those reports? A lot of the assessment work we do is we're actually looking at the effectiveness of a lot of these controls. So we've got many cases where we have people getting 10,000 line reports every single day, and they're just clicking through because you're never going to be able to read through a 10,000 line Excel spreadsheet to try to figure out, okay, what did the DBAs actually do? And oh, by the way, that report often includes just SQL statements. So is that person who's actually reviewing that competent to review that? Are they qualified to go through the list of SQL statements and try to figure out what the DBAs were doing? So when you're thinking through a lot of setting up the auditing, setting up the process, to capture the information is actually where people spend a lot of the time. And that's actually the easy part. The hard part is actually how am I actually displaying this data? How am I actually using it effectively within the organization to know what's happening in the environment? Was that appropriate activity? Should that be actually flagged? Is that a violation? Is that a security event? Those are the key pieces of information. That's where the auditing really provides its value, not just capturing it, but actually reacting to it, acting upon it, understanding that things are either appropriately happening in the environment or not. So oftentimes what we get is a lot of these just broad statements being made. The one we always love, the internal auditors always come up time after time, is they're asked, okay, what do you want to see happening? Well, I want to see all changes. Well, that's great for an internal auditor to say, oh yeah, just track all changes. I want to see everything that's happening. Unfortunately, for a system like the Oracle Business Suite, this is a very complex technology environment. Lots of things are happening at many different layers. So we've actually done some of this work and actually tried to track all the different changes. Usually stop at about 50 to 100 different types of changes. Kind of like, okay, this is not meaningful because we're getting to a very low granular level of detail. But these changes are not material anymore. And it's just producing a massive amount of data. So if I apply just an Oracle Business Suite patch, that may produce a couple hundred lines of changes. Do I care about that? Do I care about every single SQL statement that the Oracle patch applied actually had on the environment? I may or may not, but most likely what I'm really concerned about is, yes, that patch got applied. Did that patch go through change control? Was it appropriately tested? Who authorized that change to go into production? That's really what I'm caring about. Another one is, well, the DBAs have to start reviewing all this audit trail data. What do you mean they're not reviewing the audit trail data? They get all the reports and they need to be reviewing this. The problem is a lot of the work around the audit trail is, okay, I have a lot of generic accounts in the Oracle Business Suite. I'm concerned about what the DBAs are doing. I actually want to know what they're doing. Are they abusing those accounts? Are those accounts being shared? Is it appropriate that the DBAs are responsible for reviewing those? So a lot of the work also is like, what's the segregation of duties? Where's the audit trail data? How is it protected? Who's actually reviewing it? And in many cases, the people reviewing it are part of the change control process, which it should be outside. There has to be a segregation of duties around the auditing and logging. So people who are not directly responsible for the system need to be reviewing that. In small organizations, that becomes very difficult. That said, the DBAs should be reviewing information. They should have an understanding of what's changing in the environment. So one of the things that often happens as an Oracle Business Suite is when you apply major patches or do big version upgrades, Oracle database for the Oracle Business Suite is creating Oracle database accounts. It's very nice actually to send the DBAs a report around user creation so they understand that, hey, I applied that patch and it created 5 new database accounts. So if I do an upgrade from 12.1.3 to 12.2.7 of Oracle Business Suite, it actually creates 4 new database accounts. Oh, by the way, those 4 new database accounts have default passwords. And oh, by the way, it's not in the documentation by Oracle that says, oh, that we created 4 new database accounts if you do this upgrade. So if you actually send that report to the DBAs, they're like, hey, I've got 4 new database accounts. I now have to go change those passwords. So yes, the DBAs need to be receiving some of the audit trail reporting, but they should not be reviewing every single one every single day because it's a segregation of duties violation. Somebody else often has to be doing that. And the final one here is that all activities track back to a named user. And this is a challenging one for Oracle Business Suite because within the Oracle Business Suite environment, there are a number of highly privileged generic accounts that unfortunately must be used. So when a DBA is doing their normal activity, they have to be using the sys account, the system account, the application account. Oftentimes, they also have to be using the sysadmin account. So it actually becomes very challenging to get back to, hey, DBA Bob or DBA Jane did this activity. I don't necessarily know oftentimes that when a patch was applied that it was actually Bob or Jane applied the patch. I know that the system account was used, the apps account was used at these time frames, but it's very difficult without very sophisticated auditing tools that are outside the scope of standard Oracle Business Suite that have to now go potentially buy tools like Imperva, Guardium that will actually help me get back to a named user. And even in those cases, that's often a forensic audit trail. So in terms of just producing a report out of Oracle Business Suite to say, okay, the system user was used 25 times, and it was actually used by this named user, becomes very difficult. Even in the auditing, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to try to get back to that as whenever possible, but it's very difficult in certain cases, especially around the use of the system user and the apps user. So when we talk about how to actually turn on auditing and logging, so the first step is actually we probably should be doing a requirements definition. This is oftentimes what people don't do. They don't sit back and say, okay, what do we care about? What information, and how do we actually get back to, oh, why are we actually capturing this? And so Integrity actually has walked through this process. We released a framework. So again, this is part of the white paper that's on our website that's available for free. You don't even have to register or give us your email address. You can just download it. It's been downloaded over 100,000 times. That we actually walk through this process. We start talking about, okay, when we talk about Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, what do you want to capture? So we kind of map back to the COVID standard for credit cards, PCI DSS, HIPAA, FISMA. So we actually go through all those compliance standards and say, okay, what should we be capturing from a compliance security regulatory environment? And then we map that back to a set of foundation events, and then based on each part of the technology stack, we can say, okay, yes, this is what we want to capture, and this is the reason we're capturing it. Your organization may have very specific audit requirements. You may have Sarbanes-Oxley controls that then need to be audited that can be layered on top of this. But this is a starting point. This is at least to get the process going to say, okay, yeah, these are the pinpoint audits we need to do, and this is why we're capturing it. So when we talk about the framework events, we've actually mapped out in our white paper very clearly, hey, we want all logins, we want all logoffs, all unsuccessful logins, getting down to all key security events, both at the application layer and the database layer. So it's very important because, again, I've got application accounts, but I also have database accounts. If someone can go into a database account directly to the database level, my application security controls are out the window. So I'm very concerned about what's happening at the database layer as well as the application layer. So I want to know how security is being changed at these different layers. I want to know what objects are being incorporated, what changes that hopefully should have gone through change management that at least now I can try to get back to and say, okay, yeah, these 10 tables were created. Who created them? Why were they created? When were they created? And then now I can actually provide that information to the auditors and say, okay, here's a list of all the table changes. You can now sample two ways, either sample a change ticket and say, okay, that change ticket was executed at this time. Hey, this is the tables that were changed. And then they can also sample from a table change back to what actually happened in my change management system. So it's very key to at least have this information. And without auditing and logging, the Oracle database doesn't track much of this. The Oracle application doesn't track all full changes. So in order to get changes, I have to turn things on that are not turned on by default in the application. So that's a very key point here, is we're turning things on that aren't enabled by default so we can get a full history, because Oracle's not doing it by default, not doing it in a standard way without actually enabling auditing and logging. And so now we've mapped these all back to these different compliance standards. Again, most of these compliance regulations are very broad. Hey, I need to be capturing these pieces of information. And one of the key points about our framework is we know everyone can't do this right away. So actually within our white paper, we're very cautious about saying, okay, let's get started and do what we consider a baseline. What's the absolute minimum you should be doing? And then we actually have a level 1, 2, and 3. So as you go along the maturity model, let's get something enabled initially, get it up and running, get the information captured, enable a minimum set of alerts and reports. But then as the maturity evolves, as you get comfortable with that, hey, let's centralize that data. Then let's actually add in very much more complex auditing to get moving. Because one of the things we always have seen is a lot of these failures around these types of projects are you try to do everything at once and try to blow it out and have it massive, and it's not that easy. There's a lot of nitpicking items here. There's a lot of things that work or don't work in an environment. Some clients will actually do the same report, and one client will get 50 changes a month. Another client will get 10,000 changes a month. It's just because your usage of the Oracle Business Suite environment changes. In some cases, it's just like database patches. We've got some clients who apply database patches all the time because they run into weird problems. Other clients say, we never apply a database patch. Throughout the Oracle Business Suite, there's many examples of that on how you use the application. Some organizations are creating application users all the time. Others are fairly stable that, yeah, we get a new employee, we'll create a couple. But other organizations are constantly creating application users just because their volume of users is much more significant. So again, a maturity model is also included in the framework to say, okay, let's do this in a systematic way over time and grow upon it as much as possible in a very logical way also. So now let's talk about what capabilities are in the Oracle Business Suite. So what can we actually audit? And the fundamental problem within Oracle Business Suite is without turning on additional audits, I don't have a full record of what's happening. A lot of people say, oh, well, we have the who columns within Oracle Business Suite. The who columns are actually in almost every table. There's a few tables that don't have them, but it's fairly logical, the reason why those tables don't have them. But in any table that you really want to see what's happening, you'll have the who columns. And the who columns are actually two sets of columns. One is creation, and one is last update. So it's very clearly who created this record, when they created it, and then who last updated it. Unfortunately, in this case, for the example here is FND user, which is all the application users in the application. I get created by and last update. What I miss is if someone goes in and changes this one user's password 12 different times, I only know when somebody created the user and the last time that password got changed, not that some people went in and changed the password 10 different times. That might be meaningful to understand, okay, yeah, people are altering this password for some reason using the system administrator responsibility. I don't see that history as all a part of the standard tables. So it becomes very important that when I'm going through this, I need that history. I need to understand what's happening and changing over time in the environment. And so therefore, this is why I need auditing. I'm only seeing last update and created by. I'm not seeing the entire history over time. And that's what turning on auditing will give me. So within the Oracle Business Suite, there's a number of different points where I actually can do auditing. And we'll talk about the first three here throughout the presentation. The other two are other additional ways that auditing is happening. But the key three ways within Oracle Business Suite that information is captured is the sign-on audit, which will tell me who's logging in, who's selecting responsibility, and what forms they're using. Page access tracking will tell me what HTML web pages are being used. And the audit trails will actually is even a more sophisticated method that will actually put a trigger on specific tables so I can actually see any time an insert, update, or delete occurs to a very specific table. And a table will map to maybe system profile options, users, responsibilities, menus, functions, things like that. So I can get to a very low level of granularity of detail to say, okay, yeah, 5 new users were added. A single user was changed 10 different times. I can get that level of information. What we won't cover in this presentation is there's some other different areas within the Oracle Business Suite that auditing can happen. One is within each specific module, there's certain modules like HR, HCM, that has date tracking. So when I actually change an employee's information, that information is automatically audited. In terms of, it's not really an audit trail, it's really just capturing that information over time. And so within date tracking within HR, that information is fully captured. There's also a number of third-party tools that actually can also add in a layer of auditing to Oracle Business Suite. These are kind of out of the scope because, again, these are third-party. You have to purchase them. And there's really two major ways that these products do it. One is by using triggers, which is very similar to the way the EBS audit trails work. But these tools give you a GUI front end, give you a little bit more capabilities to set that up. Tools like Chaosis, CS Audit, are good examples of a trigger-based auditing solution. The Oracle GRC product, CCG, does that. There's a couple tools out on the market, including our product, Integrity App Sentry, that will actually snapshot tables. So App Sentry will take the key security tables and actually take a snapshot. Every time it runs a scan, it snapshots, such as responsibility, so we can actually see changes. Config Snapshot will also do it. But again, these are third-party products and will be out of the scope of this presentation. We'll focus in on the native capabilities within Oracle Business Suite and the database moving forward. So sign-on audit is one of those things that if you're running 12.1, it's off by default. You should definitely have it enabled. If you're running 12.2, it's actually the default is form. However, if you upgraded and was set to none, it will still be set to none in 12.2. So sign-on audit will actually capture some very key pieces of information. So if you set it to the user level, it captures all logins. If you set it to responsibility, it'll capture every responsibility selection. So when I sign on to the application, I see my list of responsibilities. Sign on audit will pick each time I use one of those responsibilities. And then finally, form auditing will capture every time I access a form. It won't tell me what I'm doing in the form. So if I actually just brought up a form in HR and actually looked at a person versus actually changed data, this audit doesn't tell me what actually did. It just says that you went into the AP invoice workbench. That's all it'll tell you, that somebody went in there. It doesn't say that they actually looked at an invoice or they created an invoice, they deleted an invoice or whatever they did in that form, but it tells you they actually accessed it. One of the key reasons we always like to have people having the sign-on audits at the form level is that if you do identify a segregation of duties violation, at least now you have the data to say, hey, yes, we had a segregation of duties violation. This person had the two responsibilities that were conflicting, or actually down to the function level. I can now go back and look at the data and say, yes, we had that violation in the security setup, but that person never actually accessed the forms that would have been able to exercise that violation or the conflict. So it's always very important to have this data enabled because, again, we always want to know who's accessing the system where. One of the key things about sign-on audit is it's at the form level. So when we talk about the form auditing, it's auditing the forms, that professional interface. Because remember, Oracle Business Suite is two different interfaces. It's the professional forms interface, that's the Java client pages, but it's also the self-service, the web HTML pages. And so the sign-on audit tracking only does the forms. If you want to capture who's actually accessing web pages, such as Oracle Applications Manager, some of the user management pages, those type of pages, you actually have to enable a secondary feature called page access tracking, which then will track that activity. So now I can get actually down to a very granular level of detail who's actually accessing what web pages at what point. And this is actually show you here where it's enabled, that it actually has to be enabled by the DBAs. This is off by default. They actually have to run a concurrent manager program, scheduling it daily to actually populate the data for the reporting purposes. There's some other additional logging here. So I can get unsuccessful logins and concurrent requests. So every time a concurrent manager program is run, I have that audit trail data. Fortunately, unsuccessful logins and concurrent requests are actually done by default. So this is not something you have to turn on. So you actually have this data. The one thing you do have to be careful about is we see many clients that are actually purging this data after 7 days. It's some data. This does not generate a ton of data, especially compared to some of the very large tables. We see workflow tables that they're just gathering gigabytes of data. We had one client recently that we looked at where the storage was being used, and they had a gigabyte of worthless workflow diagnostic background information that you can just purge routinely. They had never purged it, so they had about a gigabyte there. And then they were purging all the sign-on audit, unsuccessful logins, concurrent request data, and they were purging it every 7 days, even though it was generating about a megabyte a quarter. And they were like, oh, that's too much space. And then they just had this worthless workflow data that you should be purging. They weren't purging. It was a gigabyte. So you have to be careful about that in often cases that this is very useful data. This is meaningful on what's happening in your system, and it should not be being purged. We recommend typically 13 months of online in order that if you do have an audit that happens annually, you still have the audit trail going back for the 12 months to understand what happened in case you find a segregation duty violation, in case there's a forensic audit trail that you have to review to see, okay, what happened? What did this user actually do? And then the final Oracle Business Suite audit capability is audit trails. So audit trails is set up on specific tables. And so those other audit trails are fairly easy to turn on. There's not a lot of work to it. Somebody can do it fairly routinely, very quickly. But the audit trails now gets down to actually individual tables. What pieces of information do I want to capture within the Oracle Business Suite? And the way audit trails works is actually creates a trigger, and a trigger is a very standard Oracle database concept. And a trigger watches all the activity to a table, and if there's an insert, update, or delete to the table, the trigger is executed. And the Oracle Business Suite Audit Trail functionality actually automates the creation of these triggers and the management of these triggers. So let's say I've got the FND user table, which is all the application users, and I specify certain columns on that table. Let's say I want to know every time email addresses change for my users. I go into the EBS front end and actually set up audit trails, and I say for the email column, track everything that's happening to that email address column. So if someone creates a new one, someone changes one, I get a full audit trail about who actually created it in the application. This will also capture the information if someone actually does it behind the scenes and does it at the database level, but I won't actually capture the creation, who created it. So I know something happened, but I actually won't know who did it, because if they go in and say apps user or something like that, all it says is the apps user did it. So where the design effort now comes in is, okay, what are these tables that I want to look at? Because again, most everything in the Oracle Business Suite, every kind of what you think of as a data element, an attribute, is stored in a separate table. So when I start talking about profile options, how those are changing, I'm going to have to now look at F&D profile options. If I want to see the actual values of the profile options versus if someone creates a profile option, I need to look at F&D profile option values. Security, just to look at security at the application layer, I'm going to have to look at F&D user, F&D responsibilities, F&D menus, menu entries, functions, grants. So there's lots of different pieces here. If I want to know about if someone's creating a concurrent manager program, I have to look at both F&D concurrent programs, F&D executables. And this is a short list. This is actually, we've got much longer lists that we do based on what are the requirements. So when you're looking through, we often categorize these in a couple of different ways. We're looking at the EBS security, the configuration. And the configuration also can get down to within each module. So AP payable options, I may be wanting to know what's changed in terms of options within the payable system, or general ledger posting options, things like that. Customizations, so what changes are they making to the system? So again, all these, based on your organization, some of these items may be going through change control, some may not be. So oftentimes when an organization talks about change control, they're talking about like customizations. Okay, you're creating a new concurrent program, you're defining an executable. The question is a profile option value change part of change management? Is the creation of users? If someone's going in and actually updating a menu, is that change control? So how you actually use this information and what you're going to do with it may change based on how you actually view changes in the environment. So again, but for the auditor, they should be looking at these pieces of information. So I care about segregation of duties. I want to know what responsibilities are being created, how are responsibilities being assigned, and things like that. Finally, the inclusion criteria we have is you have to be very careful, because auditing and logging can cause performance issues. So everything we're talking about here is I'm not doing a full audit trail on all of the orders. I'm not doing on every general ledger transaction. What we're looking at is trying to pick out the changes in the system that have a security, compliance, or change impact, but also that they're low volume. I'm not looking at things here that every single user, if I have 1,000 users, that they're going in and creating orders and creating 1 million orders a year. If you try to audit that type of thing, that will cause a performance issue. I can even get down to the data element layer. So even limited master data tables, when we're talking about those types of things, I'm talking about vendors. So like a really good audit would be vendor bank account numbers. So if I'm trying to do some sort of fraud, great way is just to update your vendor bank accounts and actually start sending checks not to the vendor but to another address. Vendor addresses, billing or payment addresses become very important. The key thing that we're going to try to avoid is anything that's, quote, a transactional table, something that has huge amounts of volume to it. Becomes very important, because that's where I can cause performance issues. But I'm also, not only a performance issue, if I'm starting to track and audit that type of information, I'm getting 10,000, 20,000 page reports out of it. That's not what I want. I want to know is, okay, if 100 responsibilities got changed, I want to know those 100 responsibilities. Therefore, that becomes a meaningful audit that can go to maybe internal audit or go to someone to be reviewed and say, okay, there's 100 changes this past quarter. That's manageable, and I can probably sample off that pretty easily. But to know every single thing that happened on a transactional basis, audit-wise, that's just not meaningful information. So we're going to try to avoid that because not only is it difficult to review, it's also potentially causing a performance issue. So that's kind of at a very high level, the e-business suite auditing. Again, for Oracle e-business suite, the technology stack is both the application, the database, things are happening. So I actually have to turn on specific audits now at the database level to say what's happening. And the problem with the Oracle database audit trail is, again, I've got a couple different ways to do it with the e-business suite to capture different pieces of information at different layers. But now also at the database, I've got many different things that I can do at the database auditing and many different ways that information is captured from a logging and auditing perspective. And I can actually do some of these things multiple ways. So I've got fine-grained auditing, I've got standard auditing, I've got the auditing of the sys user, I've got network activity that will actually generate a log file. So if we boil that previous chart down to kind of what we want to think about and try to focus in on, there's really three major categories that you want at least to start with. And it starts with native database auditing. So this is kind of the standard audit trail within the Oracle database, which is exceptionally powerful. It can do very sophisticated levels of audits for very specific actions. Unfortunately, again, whenever you think about database auditing, always think about all it's doing is capturing SQL statements. It's categorizing those and breaking those up a little bit, but it's a SQL statement at the end of the day. It's not capturing an action. It's not capturing an activity that you would think of as from an audit perspective. It's capturing that somebody did a create user SQL statement. Yeah, that's creating a user, but it's actually fundamentally still capturing this the create user. It can be written in different areas in the database. The second one here is sys auditing. The sys user is kind of, think of it as the root user of the database, that it's actually there and it has full control, full power over the entire Oracle database. It is audited separately because it can't fill up the audit trail. If the audit trail fills up in the database shuts down. So the sys user is always audited separately to a separate location, etc. So you always have to think about sys auditing as separate. Finally, if the native auditing doesn't work for you and you want to get down to a really low level of granularity, you can actually turn on fine-grained auditing, which will actually let you get down to a specific audit. So if someone creates a purchase order greater than $10,000, I can actually do a specific audit on that. I'm probably a little bit better to do that at the database or at the application layer, but there's certain things I potentially want to do at the database layer. I won't delve into this too quickly or too far, but the Oracle has changed the way auditing is done at the database level. So with Oracle Database 12c, Oracle has introduced a brand new auditing capability called unified auditing that takes and solves some of the challenges previously with the native auditing, because there's multiple locations where the audit trail went. I couldn't do kind of larger policies around auditing. Everything was just this audit, that audit, things like that. Unfortunately, unified auditing, when it came out in 12.1 of the database, it had tons of bugs and performance issues. So we actually recommended people do not run unified auditing. Oracle 19c has come out recently as the latest version of the Oracle database, and it has corrected most of the issues. So unless you're on 19c, we recommend you don't use unified auditing at this point. When you upgrade to 19c, we think you should be using unified auditing because it does provide a lot of capabilities. So the question is, when we're talking about auditing at the database layer, what should we be looking at? And again, it's very similar at the application layer, that we want to do the same things. We want to know who's connecting to the database, what's happening with users, are they getting created, are their passwords being changed, what's happening at the system change level, what security changes are happening with like grant and revoke statements, what objects are being created. This is a short list. In our white paper, we go to much more level of granularity. So some things like in the white paper are described out as object changes. So if tables are being created, packages are being created, things that would be around customizations are also in there. This chart here highlights mostly the security changes to the database. So what's happening in a security perspective. So again, you're turning on individual audits to capture this information. The Oracle database also has some sophisticated things that you can add on to it. One is change ticket tracking. So I cannot do this at all at the application layer, but at the database layer, if DBAs are making specific changes manually by going in and actually executing SQL statements, even if these are being done as part of scripts, they can actually add in a ticket number. I'm going to show you an example of this in a second. But they can actually run a little package that you create that would then set the ticket number. So in this example, kind of under step 1 here, is the DBA goes and it actually executes what we call a benign SQL statement, and they execute this and they set the ticket number to 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they actually go in and do their user creation. So they were given a ticket, go create this user in the database, they go do it. And what will happen is that ticket number will now be attached to the audit trail. That now becomes very powerful. And now if I'm centralizing the logging, which we'll talk about next, I can now create reports based off of that. So I can actually create 2 reports. One is user creation with tickets and one's without. So then this can go to an auditor or someone and they can actually get 2 reports and say, these are all the users that were created that then were assigned ticket numbers. I can just sample that. I don't really have to go verify every one. At least I'm doing some sampling. I'm doing my due diligence. But then I also can create a report that's unauthorized user creation. So users were created without a ticket. Every user on that report probably should be reviewed to say, okay, why is this a policy violation? And in the Oracle Business Suite environment, I will get some user creation that patches are creating users, upgrades are creating users, which are valid. But at least then I understand that, yeah, these users were created by this automated process. Oh, by the way, they may have a default password. I should probably have a little bit of a review process to say, okay, that user was created by an automated process. Did that have a default password? What other steps are being done there? So now this becomes very, very powerful. And now I'm starting to automate some of these processes by doing a simple process change for the DBAs, but now I'm actually capturing this. This doesn't do everything, but if DBAs are making manual changes to the database, even creating packages, updating things like that, now this takes my auditing and my compliance a great step forward because I know now back potentially to a ticket of what actually happened. So the previous sections were really focused in on capturing the data, turning it on. What layers can I actually turn on? Where can I capture it? Now the question is, what do I do with the data? Because again, I have to retain it, I have to learn on it, I have to report on it. And one of the big problems is a lot of this previous data was actually stored in the database. So the DBAs have full capability to manipulate the data. So how do I actually get around that? And there's actually a number of different ways you can actually centralize this information. I can now integrate Oracle Business Suite with a centralized logging solution. A lot of organizations have tools like Splunk, and I'll demonstrate Splunk here. But again, there's other tools out there, ArcSight, QRadar, Elasticsearch. So there's lots of different possibilities that I can now actually take this data from the database and actually put it somewhere else that I can actually do a better job of protecting it, alerting on it, and reporting on it. And so there's a few ways I can actually do this really easily. And so in terms of the Oracle database can send out its audit trail in near real time out to syslog. So this is actually one of those things that's very simple to set up that I actually can just go in and configure this at the database. I configure my database server to actually send this syslog data up to my external collector. In this case, I'll show you an example here of Splunk that will actually forward in real time the audit trail data from the database immediately off to Splunk, and therefore it's protected. The DBAs cannot manipulate this data. It's not stored in a database table. It's actually sent in real time. I can also make it so it's written out to the operating system so the DBAs can have it also if they want to see it. But the key is I'm protecting it. I'm sending it off. Now I can actually report on it. It becomes very important. Unfortunately for the Oracle Business Suite, I can't do the same level of capability. I can't actually take it and send it out via syslog. This is stored in tables. So one of the challenges here is when we're talking about doing a full capability to audit and log many different things, again, as we talked about, they're stored in many different locations by a number of different technologies are actually capturing this audit trail in order to get a full scope of what's happening in an Oracle Business Suite environment. So therefore, I now actually have to configure multiple ways to gather data. So I can do syslog for the database, but when I'm talking about these tables that are stored in the database for Oracle Business Suite, now I actually have to potentially do another solution to actually pull the information out of the tables. But most of the tools out there do that. So if you're running Splunk, they have an add-on called DB Connect. What I do is I configure in DB Connect to connect to the database, and I can do this every 10 minutes, every hour, once a day, to actually go in, log into the database, and actually pull information out and actually throw it into Splunk, and therefore now I have it captured and I can report on it, I can alert on it, etc. Because again, this becomes very powerful. So the challenge is that I have to now configure multiple ways to get a full scope of the data, but I can actually get it all into one tool. So I've got all my data there, and I can report on it and actually look at it very easily. So the goal is for retention and protection, I'm actually putting this into a third-party system. So now the question is, what am I actually going to do in terms of alerts and reports? And so when we go through the framework, we actually take each of our key events and actually start mapping it out. What are things that are useful? So when I'm starting to look for this, I'm looking at, okay, what direct database logins am I getting? What am I looking at there? I want report to that to say, okay, yeah, this generic account's being accessed by 5 different users. Sysadmin at the application layer is actually very important, because within the Oracle Business Suite, there's an application user called sysadmin. That account cannot be disabled. It must be used for certain activities. So I want to know who's using that. And we actually have some ways that we can actually track that back to a named user also, and AppSentry can do, or our product App Defend can actually protect the sysadmin account. But at least I need to know who's using it, what are they doing. I want to know all logins and logoffs of different accounts. I want to know all database creation of accounts, so I can now audit those back. And some of these other ones are actually turning on audit trails to protect the audit trail. Because again, the DBAs have access to turn off auditing. So if I'm turning on auditing specifically to audit the DBAs, I need to have capabilities to say that the auditing was not turned off by the DBAs. Because that's some of the challenges with Oracle Business Suite and the Oracle database is the administrators who I'm trying to protect against have access to turn this stuff on and off, both at the database layer, at the application layer, but I can actually go into the database and turn off the application auditing by just executing SQL statements. So it's very important that I'm actually getting audit trails around a lot of this information. And again, through the presentation, the presentation will also be online, so I'm looking at things. So not only am I doing auditing, I'm also hopefully creating real-time alerts. We're looking at the 2 in the lower left here. Do I have invalid access attempts against certain accounts? Am I going against accounts like CTX Sys at the database layer? That's a clear indication of a security violation. So it's very important to actually not only have compliance, change management, application controls auditing turned on, but also turn on security events. Because there's a number of database accounts that if someone's going to hack into your database, they're going to try to log into an account called CTX Sys. The password is CTX Sys by default. But anytime I see even an unsuccessful login against the CTX Sys account, that is a clear security violation. Someone is going after your database. We put this audit in many organizations, and we've actually had it triggered, and we've had phone calls that people said, this was triggered, what should we do? And I'm like, yeah, somebody's going after your database, and they've identified that there were hacking attempts based off of those alerts. It doesn't happen all the time, but there's enough to say, yes, that's an effective control to know that someone is actually scanning your environment on your network, looking for weak database accounts, trying to hack in. So those are the types of things that become now very powerful controls, very powerful security indicators to say, yep, something is wrong in this environment. Again, more activity. And now as I take this to the next level, I can say, okay, yes, what's the sysadmin user doing? What actually activities did they do? What forms did they use? Those types of things. Now I can generate a report off that and actually have that reviewed by someone to say, yes, this was appropriate activity by the sysadmin user, because unfortunately I can't disable it. I have to have that generic account. And then as sophistication grows, I can now have many more audit trails within the environment that I can actually capture. I can then send these files off to Splunk or my whatever tool I'm using, because again, tools like Splunk have very powerful capabilities to pull in and ingest data. They can do it via syslog. They can connect to database tables. They can actually go in and get files. So they can go out to the database server, log into the database server, and retrieve files. these things become very powerful. And then finally, if I even go to the EBS audit trails, now previously we were talking about just very high-level security events in the application's key setups. But I can actually get down to very powerful application security controls. So I can start looking at what's changing in my supplier master bank accounts, both for my accounts and my vendors' accounts, what's changing in customer master information, etc. So I can get to a lot of information that, again, we don't recommend doing it on the first round, but as soon as you understand what you're capturing, how you're capturing it, everything's working well, within 6 months to a year, you now expand that out, add in things that are potentially pay to procure fraud, those types of things. And so real quick here, we've got a couple of minutes. I'll actually jump out to our Splunk environment here. So this is Splunk, and so we've actually hooked up an Oracle Business Suite environment to a test Splunk environment, and I'll show you a couple examples here. So I actually went and created a user before with this ticket number, and so this now becomes very, very powerful in that this is the raw information within Splunk. I can actually generate alerts and reports and actually make this a lot nicer looking. But what's very powerful here is that I actually can go through and this event has a ticket number attached. So this, let's say this is one of your change ticket numbers. So the DBA did something specific, created a user, and therefore this activity was actually captured with the ticket number attached to it. That becomes very powerful. So now I can actually sort this information out. And I can actually enrich this data. This is just the raw data, but it's very easy to create reports and things like that against it. I can also look at different source types. So all this information is coming in. So like on EBS logins, sometimes it takes a second to populate. And so now I actually can see that, yes, the sysadmin user here logged in, and they actually logged in at this time. There's some limitations within Oracle Business Suite on what information is actually captured. This is an example where I can actually see where sysadmin logged in and what time they logged in. What Oracle Business Suite does not capture is like the IP address. So in some cases, in order to have much better data, I have to buy a third-party tool. Our App Defend product will actually, it acts as a web application firewall for the application, but also enhances the logging. So with App Defend, I can actually capture logins, but also with IP addresses. That becomes very powerful, and then I can also send that information very easily up to Splunk to actually then get correlated and then be fully enriched. I can also look at like unsuccessful logins. So this information is all going up. And so, again, within Splunk, I have to define each of these elements out, but now I can very easily and very creatively create dashboards around this. I can create alerts. So if I see an unsuccessful login against like sysadmin, that really probably shouldn't be happening. I should be generating an alert that goes off to somebody. I should be looking at, okay, if I've got too many anonymous logins, that means people are not typing in the correct application username. Those types of things. So if we look at the setup on some of this information, I actually go through within the Splunk product and actually define out, in this case, this is how I'm actually connecting as Splunk to the database. So this is actually going in, connecting to the database, and actually executing this SQL statement to bring the information back. And in my configuration here, I actually tell it to go in and execute that SQL statement every 10 minutes. And so then it's going against that table, but it's actually optimizing to a certain extent. So it's got the last time it looked, and so based off of this column login ID, and it's actually knowing and understanding the last time it actually connected what login ID was, and then it picks all the new login IDs using this SQL statement. So this is kind of the example of how Splunk is actually connecting, gathering the information. But on the other side, for the database audit trail, if I go back and just kind of search on the database audit trail, this is happening in real time and just with syslog. So I actually don't have to do any other configuration. Within Splunk, to get the database syslog audit trail into Splunk, I did nothing. All I did was define in Splunk to say accept syslog, which your Splunk implementation already is doing. Whenever you set up these tools, syslog is a very common way to get data in. So I've done nothing else. I just turned it on at the database level, and Splunk automatically is consuming this. And so now I can see actually what's happening, that somebody actually went in and created this table here, F&D concurrent queues, got changed. It was changed by the apps user. And so now I've at least got the information captured. I can now start doing some reports, etc., on this information. So it becomes very powerful. So this is just a very high level. Again, our white paper, Guide to Auditing and Logging in the Oracle Business Suite, which gets continuously updated. Last update was this past August, is really a great starting point. We wrote this white paper specifically because we had so many questions. So many of our clients were just not doing this what we felt appropriately. So we actually put down, and this is about a 40-page white paper that walks through this information in great detail. This is not a marketing, this is not a sales piece. This is what we think you should be doing with steps. It doesn't go to the end because we don't know what you should be doing. We don't know necessarily who you should be sending those reports to, but we're defining out, we think you should be doing these reports, these alerts. But where those go is really down to your organizational specific types of requirements, definition, how you should be doing the design. So thank you, everyone. I will turn it back to Phil for any questions. Here's our contact information. And again, our blog and we put a lot of information on our website and our blog about how you should be doing this, what's effective, etc. I'll turn it back to Phil for any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, there are a couple questions here. The first one, is there any truth to the claim that turning on auditing/logging significantly impacts performance?
So everything we talked about here, if you turn on the audits that we recommend throughout this presentation and in our white paper, there will be no performance impact. We will use up some disk space, we'll capture the information, but the performance impact is negligible. It may be 1%. There is not, the DBAs will typically kick up at screaming like, oh no, you can't audit, it'll impact performance. And yes, you can impact performance with auditing and logging. If you turn on the wrong audits and logs and you audit too much, you're capturing too much, you're capturing transactional tables, you're capturing every time everyone reads any single table, yes, that will cause a performance issue. So if you target the auditing very specifically to what the key events you want, what key actions you want to capture, it will not cause a performance issue. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. How far can we take this without actually impacting system performance? And I think over probably the last 10 years, we've come to what we think is a pretty good solution about very little performance impact with a very high value in terms of data capture.
Next question. Our auditors want us to set an alert whenever a profile option changes. What is the best way?
Yeah, so again, there's a couple different ways that you can do something like that. So if you're pulling that information into a tool like Splunk, you can definitely very easily create an alert in a tool like Splunk and send it off. Or you can actually do that even within the standard Oracle Business Suite by using the native Oracle Alerts functionality. So if you turn on an audit on F&D profile option values and actually then go into Oracle Alerts and create an alert, you can very easily send off an alert. So there's a number of different ways to do that. That's one we always recommend, like profile option values is always something that's good to monitor, because oftentimes if something does get changed and breaks, at least now you have a history of when it got changed and who did it, and you have a better understanding of what's happening in the environment.
All right, one more question. How do I figure out the list of EBS tables to audit?
Very good question. So we give some kind of starting lists, but again, this is now back to what your requirements are. This is the requirement definition to say, okay, what do we care about and how are we going to look at it? There's two really ways to think about auditing. One is I've got a specific need, I want to capture the information, and I want to do something with it. And so again, a lot of these lists are, yes, I can be generating reports and sending these off to say, okay, yes, these responsibilities got changed, these menus got changed, these functions were assigned to different people, and I may want to sample and understand that. But a second part of auditing is I may want to capture the information purely for a forensics purpose. we turn on a number of audits in our recommendations that we do purely for forensic purposes. You're not going to do anything with the audit trail today, but we put down that there's risks, and you need to understand that if something bad happens in the environment, do I have the data that I can actually get back to and generate a forensic audit trail of saying, okay, yeah, this is what happened, this is what that user did. And so that's always a valid reason, and there's some places that you want to capture that. Some things that actually want to know that who connected to the database is really the classic forensic audit trail. Like, I need to know who connected from where to understand that if, okay, so this person was not, someone stole somebody else's credentials and they logged in and did this. Like forms, most often on the forms auditing, we don't typically look at that data. We like to push that into Splunk. We actually like to do some nice dashboards so you know who's using AP and who's using GL and how often. It's actually a really nice chart. In Splunk to actually have that knowledge and say, okay, general ledger usage goes tenfold at the end of the month. That's actually can be useful, especially for the DBAs, to understand performance and things like that. But that data, typically we don't send reports out who used what forms when. But if I now have a segregation of duties violation, I have someone who stole somebody else's credentials, that forms usage is critical to understand what they actually did. I don't know what they did in those forms, but at least I know they went into the AP supplier invoice form. They went into the AP vendor form. And that will give me a better indication of where I need to look. Did they change a vendor bank account? At least I have that knowledge to say they used these functions within the application. I need to dive down deeper into that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I think that's the last of the questions we have. I want to thank everybody for participating this afternoon, and be sure to tune us in again next month on the, I believe it's the 14th, for our next webinar. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of the week. Take care.